Some sounds can haunt a man forever, but none more than a child's cry in the wilderness. For Cowboy Jasper Wolfe, that cry would change everything he thought he knew about redemption. 3 years ago, he killed a man in a gunfight and has lived alone ever since. Now, in the middle of a Wyoming blizzard, he hears a small voice calling through the snow. He finds a little girl collapsed near his barn, half frozen and clutching a locket. When he opens it, his heart stops. The name inside reads Magnus Crowley, the man he killed. This is his enemy's daughter. With the storm raging and no help coming, Jasper has a choice. Let her freeze or save the child of the man whose life he took. But what happens when the daughter of your greatest mistake becomes your chance at forgiveness? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind howled like a banshee across the Wyoming plains, rattling the windows of Jasper Wolfe's cabin with a fury that seemed personal. He sat in his worn leather chair beside the stone fireplace, watching the flames dance while his faithful companion, Scout, a grizzled border collie with mismatched eyes, lay curled at his feet. The dog's ears twitched at every gust, as if he too understood that this storm carried more than snow. It carried consequence. 3 years. 3 years since that terrible day in Deadwood when his life changed forever. 3 years since he'd drawn his Colt and put a bullet through Magnus Crowley's heart. Self-defense, the sheriff had ruled. Magnus had drawn first, witnesses confirmed. But the law's verdict had done nothing to quiet the voices in Jasper's head. Nothing to ease the weight that settled on his chest every morning when he woke to another day of solitude. The cabin reflected his penance. Sparse, functional, stripped of comfort beyond necessity. A single room served as kitchen, parlor, and bedroom, with rough-hewn walls that bore no decoration save for a simple wooden cross his father had carved decades ago. On the small table beside his chair lay his father's Bible, its leather cover worn smooth by countless readings, pressed wildflowers marking passages about forgiveness and redemption. Some nights, when the guilt pressed too heavy, Jasper would read those passages aloud to Scout, as if speaking the words might somehow make them true. The pages fell open easily to Psalm 51. He'd read it so many times the binding had memorized the place. "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." The words felt hollow in his mouth, but he spoke them anyway, hoping someday they might take root in the barren ground of his soul. Outside, the blizzard had been building since dawn. February in Wyoming could be merciless, but this storm felt different, angrier, more determined. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in 2 hours, and the snow fell so thick Jasper could barely make out his barn 50 yards away. Scout whimpered softly, pressing closer to the fire. "I know, boy," Jasper murmured, running his weathered hand through the dog's coat. Something's not right about this one. He'd been a different man before Deadwood, before Magnus Crowley. Jasper Wolfe had been the kind of cowboy mothers pointed to when they wanted their sons to learn about honor and hard work. He'd worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana, earned respect for his steady hand and calm judgment. Men trusted him to settle disputes, to lead when danger threatened, to do the right thing when the right thing wasn't clear. Then came that spring morning in '71 when Magnus Crowley stumbled into the saloon looking for trouble. Jasper had been nursing a single whiskey, minding his own business, when Magnus started running his mouth about Yankees and carpetbaggers and how the war had been fought for nothing. The man was drunk, clearly carrying wounds deeper than liquor could heal, but his words grew uglier by the minute. Jasper had tried to diffuse the situation. "Easy there, friend. War's been over 6 years now," but Magnus had wheeled on him with wild eyes and a trembling hand. "Friend? You calling me friend, you Yankee-loving snake?" The accusation made no sense. Jasper had never served in any war, never taken a political side. But reason had fled Magnus Crowley long before he stumbled into that saloon. "I'm not looking for trouble," Jasper had said, standing slowly, hands visible. "Well, trouble's found you anyway." Magnus had gone for his gun. The rest happened faster than thought. Jasper's Colt cleared leather a heartbeat before Magnus could fire. One shot, clean through the heart. Magnus crumpled to the sawdust floor, blood pooling beneath him like spilled wine. In his final moments, Magnus had whispered a name, Penny. Then his eyes had gone empty, leaving Jasper to wonder who Penny might be and how she would mourn the man who'd forced another man to kill him. The sheriff's investigation had been thorough, but brief. 4 witnesses confirmed Magnus had drawn first. Self-defense, clear and simple. Jasper was free to go, free to continue his life as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The weight of taking a life, even in defense of his own, had settled into his bones like winter cold that never left. He'd tried to continue working cattle, but the other hands looked at him differently now. Some with fear, some with a respect he no longer wanted. He'd quit the outfit and drifted north, eventually finding this abandoned cabin in the shadow of the Wind River Range. The previous owner had died of consumption, and his widow was eager to sell cheap to anyone willing to brave the isolation. Isolation suited Jasper fine. He'd built up a small herd of cattle, enough to survive on, and settled into a routine as predictable as sunrise. Dawn brought chores, feeding cattle, mending fence, chopping wood. Afternoon meant reading or working leather, crafting the occasional saddle to trade in town for supplies. Evening brought supper, Bible reading, and the long hours before sleep when memories came calling like unwelcome visitors. His Colt Peacemaker hung on a peg beside the door, cleaned and oiled but unused. He'd thought many times about getting rid of it, but a man in this country needed protection from wolves and worse. Still, the sight of it made his stomach twist with remembrance. The storm's fury intensified, and Scout lifted his head with a soft whine. The dog had come to him as a pup 2 years ago, half-starved and abandoned, and they'd found solace in each other's quiet company. Scout had never heard gunfire, never seen violence, and in his trusting brown eyes, Jasper sometimes glimpsed the man he used to be. "What is it, boy?" Jasper asked, but Scout was already padding to the door, his nose working the air. The dog's hackles weren't raised, but something had caught his attention beyond the storm's rage. Jasper rose from his chair, joints protesting the movement. At 38, he felt older than his years, as if guilt had aged him like harsh weather ages would. He pulled aside the canvas that covered his single window and peered into the whirling white. Nothing but snow and wind and the dim outline of his barn. Then he heard it, faint as a whisper, carried on the wind like a prayer. A voice, a child's voice, calling through the storm. Scout barked once, sharp and urgent, then looked back at Jasper with eyes that seemed to say, "You hear it too?" Jasper strained to listen, but the wind swallowed all sounds except its own howling. Maybe he'd imagined it. Maybe the isolation and guilt had finally cracked his mind like winter ice. But Scout paced now, whimpering at the door, and animals didn't imagine things. He shrugged into his heavy coat, wrapped a scarf around his face, and pulled on his boots. The shotgun beside the door stayed where it was. Whatever was out there, he'd face it without weapons. He'd shed enough blood for one lifetime. The cold hit him like a physical blow when he opened the door. Snow drove horizontal across the yard, stinging his eyes and taking his breath. He could barely see 5 feet ahead, but Scout bounded into the white, following some trail only he could detect. "Scout! Wait!" Jasper called, but his words vanished in the wind. He followed the dog's tracks, stumbling through drifts that reached his knees. Each step forward felt like walking into a wall of ice and fury. The storm wanted to turn him back, to send him to his warm fireside where he belonged. But something deeper than comfort drove him forward. Then Scout barked again, urgent and insistent, from somewhere near the barn. Jasper pushed through the final drift and found his dog standing over a small mound of snow and fabric near the barn's lee side. Not a mound. A child. Jasper's heart hammered against his ribs as he knelt beside the tiny figure. A little girl, no more than 8 years old, lay curled in the snow, wearing a thin dress and a coat too big for her small frame. Her lips were blue, her breathing shallow, but she was alive. In her small fist she clutched something silver, a locket on a thin chain. Even through his thick gloves, Jasper could feel how cold she was, how close to the edge of no return. "Come on, little one," he whispered, lifting her into his arms. She weighed nothing, a bundle of bones and determination that had somehow carried her through the storm to his door. "Let's get you warm." Scout led the way back to the cabin, and Jasper kicked the door shut behind them. The sudden warmth made the child stir in his arms, a soft moan escaping her blue lips. He laid her on his own bed and began the delicate work of warming her slowly. Too much heat too fast could kill someone this cold. He removed her wet clothes and wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then built up the fire until the cabin glowed with warmth. While she slept, he examined her meager possessions. The locket had fallen from her grasp, and with trembling fingers, Jasper opened its silver catch. Inside, a man's face stared back at him. Angular features, dark hair, eyes that held both kindness and steel. Below the photograph, engraved in careful script, was a name that stopped Jasper's heart: Magnus Crowley. The child stirred then, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal eyes the same color as the man in the locket. She looked up at Jasper with trust that cut deeper than any knife, and spoke her first word in a voice barely above a whisper: "Papa." The word hung in the air between them like a blade. "Papa." The child's eyes searched Jasper's face with innocent hope, and he felt something break inside his chest, not his heart, which had been broken for 3 years, but something deeper. His very soul seemed to crack open at the sound of that single word from Magnus Crowley's daughter. "No, little one," he whispered, his voice rough as sandpaper. "I'm not your papa. My name is Jasper." The girl's face crumpled with disappointment, but she didn't cry. Instead, she struggled to sit up, her small hands clutching the blankets around her like armor. "Papa's gone," she said matter-of-factly, with the terrible wisdom children acquire too young. "Mama said he went to heaven after the bad men hurt him." Jasper's throat constricted. Bad men. If only she knew one of those bad men was warming her by his fire, feeding her soup from his own bowl. "What's your name, child?" "Penny." She touched the locket at her throat, now warmed by her skin. "Penny Crowley. Papa gave me this before he went away. He said it would keep me safe." The name hit Jasper like a physical blow. This was the Penny that Magnus had whispered in his dying breath, his daughter, the child who would grow up without a father because Jasper Wolf had been faster with a gun. He closed his eyes, fighting against the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm him. "Are you sick, Mr. Jasper?" Penny asked, her small voice full of concern. Even half-frozen and orphaned, she worried about others. Magnus Crowley might have been a troubled drunk, but he'd raised a good child. "I'm fine, sweetheart." The endearment slipped out before he could stop it, and Penny smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her thin face, making her look less like a waif and more like the little girl she should have been allowed to be. Scout padded over to the bed and rested his chin on the mattress beside her. Penny giggled, a sound like silver bells, and scratched behind his ears. "What's your dog's name?" "Scout. He found you out there in the storm." "Good boy, Scout," Penny whispered, and the dog's tail thumped against the floor. Animals and children, Jasper thought. They recognized goodness in each other without pretense or judgment. As Penny grew stronger, warmed by the fire and the hot broth he spooned into her, she began to talk. Not just words, but a steady stream of information that made Jasper's blood run cold with each revelation. "We were going to Oregon," she said, curled against Scout's warm flank. "Mama said we'd have a farm there with apple trees and a pond. But our wagon broke, and then the storm came, and Mama got sick." Jasper's spoon froze halfway to his mouth. "Your Mama? Where is she now?" Penny pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her coat pocket, a child's drawing in colored pencil, crude but clear enough. It showed a path through trees marked with simple landmarks, a big rock shaped like a bear, a creek, a grove of dead cottonwoods. At the end of the path she'd drawn a wagon tipped on its side. "I drawed a map," she said proudly, "so I could find help and come back. Mama's real sick and baby Samuel won't stop crying. I told them I'd bring someone to help." The spoon clattered from Jasper's nerveless fingers. Not just Penny. Magnus Crowley's entire family was out there in the storm, his wife and infant son, trapped and dying while their daughter had walked miles through a blizzard to find help. And she'd found the one man in all of Wyoming who bore responsibility for their father's death. "How long ago did you leave them?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Penny scrunched her face in concentration. 2 sleeps ago. Maybe 3. Time got funny in the snow. 3 days. They'd been trapped for 3 days in this storm, with a sick woman and a baby. Even if they'd found shelter in the wagon, even if they'd had food and warmth, the chances of survival were slim. And if Amanda Crowley was as sick as Penny described— "You were very brave," Jasper told her, and meant it. "Walking all that way to find help. Your papa would be proud." Penny's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of fierce love. "Papa was the bravest man in the world. He fought in the war and saved lots of people. Mama showed me his medals. Each word was a nail in Jasper's coffin of guilt. Magnus Crowley, war hero, devoted father, man trying to build a better life for his family in Oregon. And Jasper had killed him over drunken words in a saloon, leaving this child fatherless and her family to face the frontier alone. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it had grown stronger, the wind screaming like a tormented soul around the cabin's eaves. No help would come from town. The roads would be impassable for days. Whatever was to be done, Jasper would have to do alone. He looked at Penny, now dozing against Scout's warm side, her small hand still clutching her father's locket. She trusted him completely, this child whose life he'd destroyed before they'd ever met. She'd walked through hell to find help, and help had led her to the devil himself. But maybe that was how redemption worked. Maybe God didn't offer easy paths to forgiveness. Maybe he required a man to face the full consequences of his choices, to hold the shattered pieces of lives he'd broken and try to make them whole again. Jasper rose from his chair and walked to the window. The storm raged with biblical fury, turning the world into a white void where death waited for the unprepared. Somewhere out there, Amanda Crowley fought to keep her baby alive, probably thinking her daughter was dead in the snow. How long before she stopped fighting? How long before she gave up hope? He thought of his guns hanging by the door, the Colt that had killed Magnus, the shotgun he kept for protection. Violence had defined too much of his life already, but now perhaps his skills could serve life instead of death. He knew how to track in bad weather, how to survive in conditions that killed other men. He'd fought through storms and drought and every hardship the frontier could offer. Scout lifted his head as if sensing Jasper's thoughts. The dog's mismatched eyes, one brown, one blue, seemed to hold understanding. They'd found this child for a reason. Whatever cosmic force had guided her frozen feet to his door hadn't done so by accident. "I have to go back out there," Jasper said softly, not wanting to wake Penny. "I have to find her family." The moral complexity of the situation wasn't lost on him. He was preparing to risk his life to save the family of the man he'd killed, to face Magnus Crowley's widow and somehow explain that her husband's killer had become her daughter's savior. Amanda would have every right to refuse his help, to curse him for a murderer and order him away. She might prefer to die in the storm rather than accept aid from such hands. But Penny would die too, and baby Samuel, who'd never done anything but have the misfortune to be born Magnus Crowley's son. Whatever Amanda decided about Jasper's worthiness, the children deserved a chance to live. He began gathering supplies, rope, blankets, medical kit, food. The temperature outside had to be 20 below, maybe worse with the wind chill. Even with his heavy coat and experience, the journey would be perilous. Following a child's crude map through a blizzard was like navigating by starlight through fog. Penny stirred as he moved around the cabin. "Mr. Jasper, are you going somewhere?" He knelt beside the bed, meeting her trusting eyes. "I'm going to find your mama and baby Samuel. I'm going to bring them home." Her small hand reached out and grasped his fingers with surprising strength. "Promise?" The word stuck in his throat. He'd learned not to make promises he might not keep. Death waited in the storm, patient as winter itself. But looking into this child's eyes, Magnus Crowley's eyes, he found himself nodding. "I promise." Scout was already at the door, ready to follow him into hell itself if necessary. Animals understood loyalty in ways that shamed most men. Whatever happened out there, Jasper wouldn't face it alone. He turned back to Penny one last time. She was holding the locket tight, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer. For her mama, for her baby brother, for the man who destroyed her family and now sought to save what remained of it. Outside, the storm waited to test him. The storm hit Jasper like a living thing the moment he stepped outside. Claws of wind and ice tearing at his clothes and trying to drive him back to safety. Scout bounded ahead, his thick coat protecting him better than any man-made garment. But even the hardy dog struggled against the drifts that had built up while they'd been inside. Jasper pulled his scarf higher, leaving only his eyes exposed to the stinging snow. He'd tied one end of his longest rope to the cabin's porch rail. If they became lost, it would guide them home. The other end he wrapped around his waist. With enough length to reach Scout without tangling them both, Penny's crude map, protected in his shirt pocket, would be their only guide once they moved beyond familiar territory. A child's drawing made with colored pencils, but drawn with the fierce attention to detail that came from knowing lives depended on accuracy. She'd marked the bear-shaped rock, the creek, the dead cottonwoods, with the careful precision of someone who knew she'd have to find her way back. The first landmark should be about half a mile southeast, the creek that ran behind his property line. In summer, it was barely knee-deep and clear as mountain air. Now it would be frozen solid, buried under snow. But the depression it carved through the landscape would still be there if a man knew how to read the land. Scout ranged ahead, his nose to the ground, following some trail invisible to human senses. The dog had an uncanny ability to navigate in bad weather, as if he carried a compass in his head. More than once during their 2 years together, Scout had led Jasper safely home through conditions that would have left him wandering in circles. The cold was savage, finding every gap in Jasper's clothing and settling into his bones like an old ache. Each breath burned his lungs, and ice crystals formed on his mustache within minutes. This was the kind of weather that killed strong men and left them frozen in place until spring's thaw revealed their bodies. But Penny had walked through worse than this. An 8-year-old girl in a thin dress and oversized coat, driven by love and desperation to find help for her family. If she could manage it, he had no excuse for weakness. The bare rock appeared through the snow like a monument to endurance, a granite boulder the size of a small cabin, worn by wind and weather into the rough shape of a sitting bear. Penny had drawn it perfectly, down to the way snow collected in the depression that formed the bear's snout. "Good girl," Jasper muttered, pulling out the map to check their next landmark. The creek should curve east here, following a line of cottonwoods toward the broken wagon. Scout barked once and bounded toward a line of darker shapes barely visible through the snow. Trees, their leafless branches reaching toward the gray sky like desperate fingers. The creek had to be there, hidden beneath the white. They followed the tree line for what felt like hours, but was probably only one. Time moved differently in a blizzard, each step forward an eternity of cold and struggle. The dead cottonwoods Penny had marked were harder to find. Winter had claimed more trees since she'd passed this way, and snow made every bare trunk look the same. But Scout found them, his bark muffled by the storm but insistent. 3 cottonwoods standing together, their bark scarred by lightning and their branches twisted into claws. Penny had colored them black in her drawing, and now Jasper understood why. Even covered in snow, they looked like monuments to death. The wagon should be close now, but close in a blizzard could mean anything. Visibility dropped to arm's length at times, and the snow fell so thick it muffled sound. They could walk within 10 feet of their target and never know it. Scout ranged in widening circles, his nose working furiously. Suddenly he froze, hackles rising, and let out a long howl that cut through the storm's noise. Jasper followed the sound and found it. The Crowley wagon, overturned and half buried in snow. One wheel stood up like a gravestone, its spokes dark against the white. Canvas from the wagon's cover had torn loose and flapped in the wind like a distress flag no one would see. "Hello," Jasper called, fighting to make his voice carry over the storm. "Amanda, I've come to help!" No answer. The silence stretched taut as a held breath. He approached the wagon carefully, Scout at his side. The conveyance had tipped when a wheel broke. He could see the splintered wood and bent iron where it had collapsed. The family's possessions lay scattered in the snow. A child's doll, a cooking pot, clothes frozen stiff as boards. The canvas had been pulled tight over one end of the wagon, creating a makeshift shelter. Jasper knelt and pulled it aside, his heart hammering against his ribs. Amanda Crowley lay inside, unconscious but breathing, wrapped in what looked like every piece of fabric the family owned. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 25, with brown hair that showed traces of gold even in the grey light. Her face was pale as the snow outside, and her breathing came shallow and quick. Beside her, a bundle of blankets stirred and whimpered. Baby Samuel, alive but barely. The infant's cries were weak, the sound of a child too cold and hungry to protest with proper vigor. Jasper reached for Amanda's wrist, checking for a pulse. It was there, faint but steady. Fever burned under her skin despite the cold, her body fighting some infection or exhaustion that had claimed her strength. On the wagon floor beside her lay something that made Jasper's breath catch. A cavalry saber, its brass hilt polished to a dull gleam. Engraved on the blade were the words, "Capt. Magnus Crowley, 5th U.S. Cavalry." Below that, in smaller script, "For valor at Antietam." Magnus Crowley hadn't been just any soldier. He'd been an officer decorated for bravery, the kind of man who led charges against Confederate lines and brought his boys home alive. The kind of man who deserved better than dying drunk in a frontier saloon over words that meant nothing. "I'm sorry," Jasper whispered, his words lost in the wind. "I'm so damned sorry." But apologies wouldn't save Amanda and her baby. Action would. He gathered the unconscious woman into his arms, surprised by how light she was. Frontier life had worn her down to bone and sinew, all excess stripped away by hardship and loss. The baby he wrapped in his own coat, pressing the tiny body against his chest for warmth. Samuel was so small, so fragile. One mistake, one moment of dropped vigilance, and Magnus Crowley's son would join his father in the grave. Scout led the way back toward home, following their tracks through the snow. The return journey felt longer, weighted down with precious cargo and the knowledge that 3 lives now depended on Jasper's strength and judgment. The storm fought them every step, as if winter itself resented his rescue mission. But Penny was waiting in the cabin, trusting him to keep his promise. And somewhere beyond the storm, Magnus Crowley's spirit might find peace, knowing his family was safe, even if their salvation came from his killer's hands. The cabin felt like heaven when Jasper finally pushed through the door, Amanda's limp form in his arms and baby Samuel pressed against his chest. Penny leaped from the bed where she'd been waiting, her face bright with relief and joy. "Mama!" she cried, reaching for Amanda with small hands. "You found them." "You kept your promise." But Amanda remained unconscious, her breathing labored and her skin burning with fever. Jasper laid her gently on his bed while Penny hovered nearby, tears streaming down her thin cheeks. The baby stirred in his arms, letting out a weak cry that spoke of hunger and cold and the terrible fragility of new life. "She won't wake up," Penny whispered, touching her mother's hot forehead. "She's been sleeping since the first night. I tried to wake her, but she just talks to Papa like he's still there." Jasper's throat tightened. Delirium brought on by fever and exhaustion, probably made worse by whatever illness had claimed her strength. He'd seen it before on cattle drives, strong men reduced to babbling children by the combination of sickness and strain. "She's very sick," he told Penny gently, settling baby Samuel in the crook of one arm while he examined Amanda more closely. "But now she's warm and safe. That's the most important thing." Amanda's lips were moving, though no sound came out. Her fingers twisted at something on her left hand, a simple gold wedding band, worn thin by years of wear. Even unconscious, she sought comfort in the symbol of her marriage to Magnus. The sight of that ring hit Jasper harder than he'd expected. This woman had loved Magnus Crowley, had married him and borne his children and followed him west toward dreams that would never come true. And when fever took her reason, she called for the husband who would never answer because Jasper Wolf had put him in the ground. Baby Samuel's cries grew stronger as warmth returned to his tiny body. Jasper had no experience with infants, but common sense told him the child needed food and dry clothes. He found a clean shirt in his trunk, soft cotton that would serve as a makeshift diaper, and tried to remember what he knew about feeding babies. "What does Samuel usually eat?" he asked Penny, who was holding her mother's hand and whispering soft reassurances. "Mama feeds him," Penny said simply, then flushed with embarrassment as she realized what that meant. "But sometimes she gives him milk from a cup when her milk isn't enough. We had a cow, but she ran away when the wagon broke." Jasper had no cow, but he had a small store of canned milk he'd bought for coffee. It would have to do. He warmed it carefully over the fire, testing the temperature against his wrist until it felt right, then tried to coax the baby to drink from a spoon. Samuel was having none of it. He pushed at the spoon with tiny fists and turned his head away, his cries growing more desperate. Milk dribbled down his chin and soaked into Jasper's shirt. "Here," Penny said, climbing onto Jasper's lap with the confidence of a child who'd helped care for her baby brother since birth. "He likes it better if you hold him up like this." She showed Jasper how to support Samuel's head, how to tip the spoon so the milk flowed slowly into the baby's mouth. Her small hands guided his larger ones with surprising skill, and gradually Samuel began to accept the warm milk, his cries subsiding to soft whimpers. "You're good with him," Jasper observed, watching Penny's careful attention to her brother's needs. "Mama taught me," she said proudly. "She said big sisters have to help take care of little brothers. That's what families do." Family. The word hung between them, carrying weight Penny couldn't understand. She thought Jasper was just a kind stranger who'd rescued them from the storm. She had no idea she was sitting in the lap of the man who'd shattered her family before she'd been old enough to remember it whole. As the evening wore on, they settled into a routine born of necessity. Penny helped tend to Samuel, while Jasper tried to bring Amanda's fever down with cool cloths and gentle coaxing. The woman drifted in and out of delirium, sometimes quiet, sometimes muttering words that made Jasper's heart twist with guilt. "Magnus," she whispered, her voice thick with fever and longing. "Where are you?" "The children need you." Penny climbed onto the bed beside her mother, stroking Amanda's hot forehead with infinite tenderness. "It's okay, Mama. Mr. Jasper is taking care of us now. Papa would like him. He's brave and kind like Papa was." If only she knew, Jasper thought. If only this innocent child understood that her papa's killer was the one spooning medicine into her mama's mouth, the one changing her baby brother's makeshift diaper, the one who'd become their protector by terrible accident. Scout seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. The dog planted himself beside the bed like a faithful guardian, his mismatched eyes alert for any change in Amanda's condition. When baby Samuel fussed, Scout would pad over and rest his chin on the bed, his presence somehow soothing to the infant. He liked Scout, Penny observed, watching her brother's tiny hand grasp at the dog's fur. Animals know when people are good. The simple statement cut deeper than any accusation. If animals knew goodness, what did Scout see when he looked at Jasper? A man trying to atone for past sins, or just a killer playing at redemption? As night deepened, Amanda's fever seemed to break. Her breathing grew less labored, and the burning heat under her skin began to ease. She slept more peacefully, no longer calling for Magnus in her delirium. Jasper sat in his chair beside the fire, baby Samuel sleeping in his arms, while Penny curled up next to her mother like a guardian angel. The cabin felt fuller than it had in 3 years, filled with the soft sounds of breathing and the rustle of blankets, the crackle of the fire and Scout's contented sighs. This was what a home should feel like, Jasper realized. Not just shelter from the storm, but a place where people cared for each other, where love made the walls stronger than logs and mortar. He'd forgotten such places existed, had convinced himself that solitude was all he deserved. But now, holding Magnus Crowley's son, while Magnus Crowley's daughter slept peacefully nearby. He felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Not forgiveness, that would have to come from others, if it came at all, but the possibility of purpose beyond penance, of meaning beyond mere survival. The wedding ring caught the firelight as Amanda shifted in her sleep, and Jasper wondered what she would think when she woke. Would she see a rescuer or a monster? Would the gold band on her finger remind her of love lost, or love that might somehow impossibly be found again? Outside, the storm continued its assault on the cabin walls, but inside, warmth and safety held dominion. For now, that was enough. Dawn brought a blessed quiet to the cabin as the storm's fury finally began to ease. Amanda stirred as pale sunlight filtered through the window, her eyelids fluttering open for the first time in days. Jasper, who dozed fitfully in his chair with baby Samuel in his arms, came instantly awake at the sound of her movement. "Penny?" Amanda's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from fever and disuse. Her eyes, the same warm brown as her daughter's, searched the cabin with confusion and growing alarm. Where are we? Mama!" Penny scrambled across the bed, throwing her arms around her mother's neck. "You're awake? You've been sleeping so long, and I was scared. But Mr. Jasper took care of us and found you in the snow and—" "Easy, sweetheart," Amanda said, her voice growing stronger as she held her daughter close. Her eyes found Jasper across the room, taking in the sight of this stranger holding her son. "Who are you?" "Where's our wagon?" Jasper stood slowly, mindful of the sleeping baby in his arms. How did a man begin such a conversation? How did he explain that he'd found them by following their daughter through a blizzard, that their wagon was destroyed, that they were alive only by grace and good fortune? "My name is Jasper Wolf, ma'am. Your daughter found my cabin during the storm. She led me back to you and the baby." He kept his voice calm and steady, the way he might speak to a spooked horse. "You've been sick with fever. The wagon, it's not going anywhere. Wheels broken, and the storm did the rest." Amanda's hand went automatically to her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger, a nervous habit Jasper had noticed during her delirium. "Our supplies? Our belongings? What could be saved is here," he said, nodding toward the corner where he'd stacked their rescued possessions. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Crowley. The storm took most of it." At the mention of her name, Amanda's eyes sharpened with suspicion. "How do you know my name?" Penny bounced on the bed with excitement. "I told him, Mama. I showed him Papa's locket and everything. Mr. Jasper says Papa would be proud of how brave I was." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Amanda's gaze fixed on Jasper with new intensity, studying his face as if trying to place him in some memory. He forced himself to meet her stare, though every instinct screamed at him to look away. "You knew my husband?" Amanda asked carefully. "I knew of him," Jasper replied, which was true as far as it went. "Penny told me he was a good man. A war hero." Some of the suspicion faded from Amanda's expression, replaced by the soft sadness that came with fresh grief. "Magnus was the finest man I ever knew," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We were going to Oregon to start fresh. He said the children deserved better than the life we had in Kansas." Jasper felt each word like a physical blow. Magnus Crowley, the drunken troublemaker who'd forced a gunfight in a Deadwood saloon, had been a husband trying to build a better life for his family. How many nights had Jasper wondered about the man he'd killed? Now he was learning the truth from the widow's lips. And it was worse than his darkest imaginings. "He sounds like he was a good father," Jasper managed. "The best," Amanda confirmed, her arms tightening around Penny. "He used to tell the children stories every night before bed. Made up adventures about brave knights and noble quests. Penny loved them especially. "Tell Mr. Jasper about the dragon story, Mama," Penny said, her eyes bright with memory. "The one where the knight saves the whole kingdom." Amanda smiled, the first genuine smile Jasper had seen from her, and began to speak in the rhythmic cadence of a well-worn tale. "Once upon a time, there was a knight who made a terrible mistake. He thought he was protecting people, but his actions brought great sadness to the land. For years he wandered alone, carrying the weight of his guilt like armor made of lead, Jasper's blood turned to ice water. The story, told in the innocent context of a child's bedtime tale, struck him like prophecy. Had Magnus somehow known? Had he told his daughter stories about redemption and second chances while wrestling with his own demons? But one day, Amanda continued, the knight found a chance to use his skills for good instead of harm. He saved a family from a terrible dragon, not because he sought glory, but because it was the right thing to do. And in saving them, he learned that even the greatest mistakes could be forgiven if a man's heart was true. Did the knight find his happy ending? Penny asked, though she clearly knew the answer. He did, Amanda said softly, her eyes meeting Jasper's over her daughter's head. He learned that redemption comes not from hiding from our mistakes, but from choosing to do better when given the chance. The baby stirred in Jasper's arms, making soft sounds that meant he was waking up. Amanda held out her hands, and Jasper carefully transferred the infant to his mother's embrace. The simple act felt momentous, returning Magnus Crowley's son to his mother's arms, completing a circle that had been broken by death and distance. "Thank you," Amanda said, cradling Samuel close, "for saving him, for saving all of us. I don't know how to repay such kindness to strangers." "No repayment needed," Jasper said quickly. "Any decent man would have done the same." Amanda studied him with those penetrating brown eyes, and for a moment he feared she could see straight through to his guilty soul. "I don't think that's true," she said finally. "Decency isn't as common as it should be. We've learned that the hard way since Magnus died." The casual mention of her husband's death made Jasper's stomach clench. How long before she asked the questions he dreaded? How had Magnus died? Where? When? The truth would come out eventually. It always did. "Mama, can Mr. Jasper tell me a story, like Papa used to?" Penny asked, settling herself more comfortably against her mother's side. "I'm not much of a storyteller," Jasper said, but Penny's disappointed face made him reconsider. "Though I suppose I could try." He thought of his father's Bible, of the stories that had shaped his childhood understanding of right and wrong. Once there was a man who thought he knew the difference between good and evil. He carried that certainty like a weapon, using it to judge others without ever examining his own. "Art!" Penny listened with rapt attention while Amanda watched Jasper's face with growing intensity. "But life has a way of humbling the proud," Jasper continued. "The man learned that good and evil aren't always clear, that sometimes the best intentions lead to the worst outcomes, and that mercy is often more powerful than judgment." "What happened to the man?" Penny asked. Jasper met Amanda's eyes across the cabin, seeing something there that might have been understanding or forgiveness, or simply the recognition of shared pain. He learned to listen more than he spoke, to help more than he judged, and to trust that love could heal wounds he'd thought were permanent. Outside, the storm's last winds whispered around the cabin's eaves, carrying with them the promise of calmer weather ahead. 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. The storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and silence. Inside the cabin, the Crowley family grew stronger under Jasper's care, and something unexpected began to bloom in the spaces between words and glances. Amanda proved to be a capable woman once her strength returned. She took over the cooking with quiet efficiency, turning Jasper's simple ingredients into meals that filled the cabin with warmth and the scent of home. She mended torn clothes with needle and thread salvaged from their wagon, her fingers quick and sure, despite the hardships she'd endured. "You don't have to do all this," Jasper told her, as she kneaded bread dough at his small table. "Your guests here. You should be resting." "Idle hands make for troubled thoughts," Amanda replied, not looking up from her work. "Besides, it's the least I can do. You've opened your home to us, shared your food, your bed. Let me contribute what I can." She'd insisted on sleeping on the floor with the children, giving Jasper back his bed, but he'd refused. Instead, he'd made himself a pallet near the fire, claiming he preferred it. The truth was more complex. Sleeping in the bed where Amanda had lain, fevered, and calling for Magnus felt like a violation of something sacred. Penny had appointed herself Jasper's constant companion, following him on his morning chores with endless questions and observations. She helped him feed the cattle, chattering about the differences between his cows and the ones her family had owned in Kansas. She watched him split kindling with fascination, begging to try the smaller hatchet until he finally showed her how to hold it safely. "Papa taught me to milk cows," she announced one morning as they trudged through the snow toward the barn. "He said I had the gentlest hands in the whole family." The casual mention of Magnus made Jasper's steps falter, but Penny didn't notice. She was busy making snow angels with her mittened hands, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "I bet you did," Jasper said, his voice carefully neutral. "Your papa sounds like he was a smart man." "He was the smartest," Penny agreed, with the absolute certainty of childhood love. "And the strongest, too. He could lift me and Samuel at the same time, even when Samuel was crying and wiggling." Each memory was a small knife twist in Jasper's conscience. The Magnus Crowley that Penny described bore no resemblance to the drunken, belligerent man who died in that Deadwood saloon. Had the war changed him so much? Had grief and disappointment worn away the good man until only bitterness remained? Inside the barn, Jasper showed Penny how to curry the horses, her small hands careful on the brush as she worked tangles from the mare's mane. The animals responded to her gentle touch, and Jasper found himself watching her with something approaching paternal pride. "Mr. Jasper." Penny's voice was unusually quiet. "Do you think Papa can see us from heaven?" The question hit him like a physical blow. How did a man answer when the child's faith was pure and his own conscience was black with guilt? "I think," he said carefully, "that if love survives death, and I believe it does, then your papa knows you're safe and loved. That's what would matter most to him." Penny nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Mama says when people love us, part of them stays in our hearts forever. So Papa's still with us, just different." Back at the cabin, Amanda was tending baby Samuel while reading from a small, leather-bound book. Jasper recognized it from their rescued belongings. A journal or diary, its pages yellowed with age and handling. "What are you reading?" he asked, settling into his chair by the fire. Amanda looked up, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Magnus's letters. He wrote me one every day during the war, even when he knew they might never reach me. I saved them all." She held up a folded piece of paper, the edges soft with wear. "This one's from right before Antietam. He wrote about wanting to come home, about the farm we'd have someday, about watching our children grow up in peace." Jasper's throat constricted. The saber in their wagon had been engraved with that battle name, Antietam, where Magnus had earned his decoration for valor. How many good men had died on that field? How many had survived only to fall later to different kinds of warfare? "He sounds like he had big dreams," Jasper managed. "The biggest," Amanda said, her voice soft with memory. "Even after the war, when things got hard, when the drink took hold of him sometimes, he never stopped believing we could build something better." The drink. So she knew about Magnus's demons, the battles he'd fought with himself as well as the enemy. That knowledge should have made Jasper feel better about the confrontation in Deadwood, but somehow it made everything worse. Amanda had loved Magnus despite his flaws, had stood by him through his struggles with whatever horrors the war had left in his mind. "The last letter he wrote me," Amanda continued, pulling out another folded paper, "was the morning before he died. He'd been sober for 2 weeks, the longest stretch since he came home from the war. He was so hopeful, so determined to make things right." She unfolded the letter, and Jasper could see Magnus's careful handwriting. The letters formed with the deliberate precision of a man fighting to stay steady. He wrote, "My dearest Amanda, by the time you read this, we'll be one day closer to Oregon and our new life. I know I've disappointed you, failed you and the children more times than I can count, but I swear on my father's grave that I'll be the man you married again, the man you deserve, the man our children need." Jasper closed his eyes, unable to bear the sight of Amanda's tears as she read her dead husband's promises. Magnus had been trying to change, fighting his demons, working toward redemption. And Jasper had killed him on what might have been the first day of his better life. He never finished it, Amanda whispered, folding the letter carefully. Found it in his coat pocket after they brought him home to me. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken pain. Penny played quietly on the floor with a corn-husk doll Amanda had made for her, while baby Samuel slept peacefully in his mother's arms. This was what Magnus had been fighting for, quiet domestic moments, the simple joy of family life. I should have been there, Amanda said suddenly. Should have gone into town with him that day. Maybe if I had... No, Jasper said, the word coming out harder than he'd intended. What happened wasn't your fault. Sometimes men make choices that can't be undone, no matter who stands beside them. Amanda looked at him sharply, as if hearing something in his voice that shouldn't have been there. You sound like you know something about that. Every man knows something about choices he can't take back, Jasper replied, staring into the fire. The key is learning to live with them. That evening, as they shared supper around the small table, Penny began drawing with charcoal on a piece of paper Amanda had found in their belongings. Her tongue poked out in concentration as she worked, creating something with the fierce attention only children could muster. What are you making, sweetheart? Amanda asked. A picture of our new family, Penny announced proudly, holding up her drawing. It showed 5 figures standing in front of a cabin. A tall man with dark hair, a woman holding a baby, a little girl, and a dog with mismatched eyes. That's you, Mama, and Samuel, and me, and Mr. Jasper and Scout. We're all together and happy. The drawing hit Jasper like a thunderbolt. In Penny's innocent vision, he belonged here, was part of this family constellation. She'd drawn him standing protectively beside Amanda, his hand on Penny's shoulder, Scout at his feet like a faithful guardian. It's beautiful, darling, Amanda said, but her voice was strained. Her eyes met Jasper's across the table, and in them he saw the same recognition that was tearing him apart inside. They weren't just sharing his cabin anymore. Somewhere in the space between crisis and care, between rescue and recovery, they'd become something that looked dangerously like a family. And the foundation of it all was built on the gravest of lies. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the clear sky, bright and cold as judgment. Soon the roads would be passable. Soon they'd have to decide what came next. And soon, Jasper knew, the truth would have to come to light. The question was whether this fragile thing they'd built together could survive the telling of it. The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows with unusual brightness, turning the frost on the glass into prisms of light. Amanda was tidying the main room while Jasper worked outside, repairing a fence post that had been damaged by the storm. Penny helped her mother, chattering cheerfully about the rabbits she'd seen playing in the snow. Baby Samuel lay sleeping in a makeshift cradle Jasper had fashioned from a wooden crate and soft blankets. The peaceful domesticity of the scene felt almost too perfect, as if happiness this complete couldn't possibly last. Amanda was folding Jasper's spare clothes. He'd insisted she wash everything after their ordeal, when her fingers encountered something unexpected in the bottom of his old leather saddlebags. A piece of paper, yellowed and folded small, tucked away like a secret. At first she almost put it back without looking. A man's private papers were his own business, but something about the way it had been hidden, pressed flat against the leather like something he wanted to forget, made her curious. She unfolded it carefully, and her blood turned to ice. Wanted, dead or alive, Jasper Wolfe, for the murder of Magnus Crowley Deadwood, Dakota Territory. May 15th, 1871, $500 reward below. The bold text was a crude but recognizable drawing of Jasper's face, and beneath that a description that matched him exactly. Height 6 feet. Dark hair, brown eyes, scar on left hand from rope burn. The paper fluttered from Amanda's nerveless fingers. She stared at it lying on the floor, the words burning themselves into her brain like brands. Magnus Crowley, her husband. Her beloved, flawed, struggling husband. Jasper Wolfe had killed Magnus, the man who'd saved her children, who'd risked his life to rescue her family from the storm, who'd cared for baby Samuel with the tenderness of a father. He was the one who'd pulled the trigger that made her a widow. "Mama." Penny's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What's wrong? You look sick." Amanda couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. The room spun around her as if she was still fevered and delirious. This couldn't be real. It had to be some terrible nightmare, some cruel joke played by a universe that had already taken too much from her. But the wanted poster lay there on the floor, undeniable as winter itself. "Mama!" Penny's frightened cry brought Amanda back to herself. Her daughter was staring at her with wide, worried eyes, and baby Samuel had begun to fuss in his cradle. I'm fine, sweetheart," Amanda managed, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. She forced herself to pick up the poster, folding it with shaking hands. "Go check on your brother, please." Penny obeyed, but kept glancing back at her mother with concern. Amanda sank into Jasper's chair by the fire, her mind reeling with the implications of what she'd discovered. The man she'd been growing to care for, because she had been. God help her, she'd been falling in love with him, was her husband's killer. The gentle hands that had tended her fever had once drawn a gun on Magnus. The voice that told bedtime stories to Penny had once spoken the words that preceded gunfire. How was it possible? The Jasper she'd come to know was kind, protective, haunted by some unnamed guilt, but fundamentally good. She'd seen him with her children, seen the way he looked at baby Samuel, as if the infant were precious beyond measure. She'd felt safe with him, more secure than she'd been since Magnus died, but the poster didn't lie. The date was right. May 15th, 1871, just 3 days before the telegram had reached her in Kansas, telling her that her husband was dead. Shot down in a saloon by a man whose name meant nothing to her then, but everything now. The cabin door opened, and Jasper stamped his boots on the threshold, shaking snow from his coat. "Getting colder out there," he said cheerfully, then stopped when he saw her face. "Amanda, what's wrong?" She held up the wanted poster, her hand trembling so violently the paper rustled. "Tell me this isn't real." All the color drained from Jasper's face. He looked at the poster, then at her, then at Penny playing quietly with Samuel, oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding around her. "Amanda, tell me you didn't kill my husband." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a thunderclap. Jasper closed his eyes, as if the sight of her pain was too much to bear. "I can't tell you that." The admission hit her like a physical blow. She doubled over in the chair, gasping for air that wouldn't seem to fill her lungs. Oh God, how could you? Let me explain." "Explain?" Amanda surged to her feet, the poster crumpling in her fist. "Explain how you murdered my husband, and then played savior to his family. Explain how you let me trust you, let my children love you, knowing what you'd done." "It wasn't murder," Jasper said quietly. He drew first. "There were witnesses." "I don't care." The words exploded from her with volcanic force. "I don't care about witnesses or who drew first. You killed him. You took him away from us." Penny had stopped playing, her small face white with fear at her mother's shouting. Baby Samuel began to cry, sensing the tension that filled the cabin like smoke. "Amanda, please." Jasper took a step toward her, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "The children. Don't you dare talk about my children." Amanda snatched Samuel from his cradle, holding him protectively against her chest. "Don't you dare stand there and pretend you care about them when you're the reason they grew up without a father." "I do care about them. More than my own life." "Liar," the word was poison on her tongue. "Everything about you is a lie. The kindness, the gentleness, the guilt, all of it calculated to make us trust you." "No." Jasper's voice was raw with desperation. "None of that was a lie. What I feel for you, for Penny and Samuel, that's the truest thing in my life." "Don't." Amanda backed away from him as if he were diseased. "Don't you dare say you have feelings for me. You killed the man I loved. You destroyed my family. You have no right to any feelings about us at all." Penny began to cry, confused and frightened by the adult emotions swirling around her. "Mama, what's wrong? Why are you yelling at Mr. Jasper?" Amanda's heart broke at the innocence in her daughter's voice. How could she explain this to a child? How could she tell Penny that the man she'd grown to trust, the man she'd drawn into their family portrait, was the one who'd left her fatherless? "We're leaving," Amanda announced, though the words felt like glass in her throat. "Right now." "Get your things, Penny, but Mama, now!" Amanda's voice cracked like a whip, and Penny scrambled to obey, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You can't leave," Jasper said desperately. "The roads are still dangerous. You have no wagon, no supplies. I'd rather die in the snow than spend another moment under your roof." Amanda began gathering their meager possessions with frantic haste. "I'd rather my children freeze than be cared for by their father's killer. Amanda, please, think about what you're saying. Think about Penny and Samuel." She whirled on him with fury that could have melted steel. "I am thinking about them. Every second of every day since you took their father away from them. Do you have any idea what it's been like? Do you know what it's like to watch your daughter cry herself to sleep, asking for her papa? To hold your baby knowing he'll never remember the sound of his father's voice?" Each word was a blow that staggered Jasper backward. His face was white as the snow outside, his eyes hollowed with a pain that might have moved her if she weren't drowning in her own. "I know," he whispered. "Every day for 3 years I've lived with that knowledge. It's why I came here, why I've been alone." "Poor you," Amanda snarled, bouncing the crying baby in her arms. "Poor Jasper Wolf, suffering with his guilty conscience. Well, your suffering is nothing, nothing, compared to what you put my family through." She grabbed Penny's hand, pulling the frightened child toward the door. "Come on, sweetheart." "We're going home." "Where?" Jasper asked, desperation making his voice crack. "Your wagon's destroyed." "You have no home. Anywhere but here," Amanda said, wrapping her shawl around Samuel and pulling her coat tight. "Anywhere that doesn't have you in it." The door slammed behind them with the finality of judgment, leaving Jasper alone in the cabin that had briefly felt like home. Scout whimpered and padded to the window, watching the woman and children trudge away into the snow. Outside, Amanda's sobs carried on the wind, and Jasper sank into his chair, buried his face in his hands, and finally understood that some mistakes could never be forgiven, not even by 3 years of penance, not even by love. Jasper sat in his empty cabin for exactly 10 minutes before his conscience drove him into action. Amanda's rage was justified. He'd earned every word of her fury, but her children didn't deserve to die for his sins. He could hear baby Samuel's cries growing fainter as they moved away from the cabin, and the sound cut through him like a blade. Scout paced by the door, whimpering with distress. The dog knew something was wrong, knew the family that had made their home complete was walking away into danger. "I know, boy," Jasper said, pulling on his heavy coat. "I know." He followed their tracks through the snow, keeping enough distance that Amanda wouldn't see him, but close enough to intervene if disaster struck. The temperature was dropping again, and more clouds were building on the horizon. Another storm was coming, and Amanda had no shelter, no supplies. No way to keep her children warm if the weather turned deadly. She was walking east, toward the main road that led to town, but it was 20 miles of rough country, with no guarantee of finding help along the way. In her fury, she was making the same mistake that desperation and grief had forced on countless pioneer families, choosing the unknown dangers of the trail over the known safety of shelter. After an hour of walking, Amanda began to stumble. The baby was getting heavier in her arms, and Penny was struggling through drifts that reached her waist. They stopped frequently, Amanda setting Samuel down to rest her arms, while Penny clung to her skirts. Shivering in the bitter wind, Jasper ached to help them, to carry the baby and clear a path for Penny. But he knew his appearance would only make things worse. Amanda would rather collapse in the snow than accept aid from him. But as afternoon faded toward evening, Amanda's determination began to crack. She'd been walking for hours through difficult terrain, carrying a growing baby while trying to guide an exhausted 8-year-old. Even the strongest will had limits, and Amanda was reaching hers. She sank down beside a fallen tree, cradling Samuel against her chest while Penny huddled close for warmth. From his hiding place behind a stand of pines, Jasper could see the defeat in her shoulders, the way her head bowed with exhaustion and despair. The sight broke something inside him. This proud, strong woman, who'd survived her husband's death, who'd fought to build a new life for her children, who'd walked through hell to escape his contaminated shelter, was finally facing the reality that anger alone couldn't keep her family alive. That's when the riders appeared, 3 men on horseback, emerging from the tree line like specters from a nightmare. Even at a distance, Jasper could see they weren't friendly travelers. They rode with the loose, predatory confidence of men who took what they wanted and asked no questions about ownership. The leader was a big man, with a thick beard and a cavalry hat that marked him as either a veteran or someone who'd stolen from one. His companions were smaller, but no less dangerous, the kind of hard-faced drifters who haunted frontier towns and made their living from other people's misfortune. Amanda saw them coming and struggled to her feet, clutching baby Samuel while pulling Penny behind her. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide in the open snowfield. "Well, well," the leader called out as they approached, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "What do we have here? A lady and her young'uns all alone in the wilderness." "Please," Amanda said, her voice steady despite her fear. "We're just traveling to town. We don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" The man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Ma'am, we're the answer to your prayers. Name's Colt Crowley, and these are my associates. We've been looking for someone, and I do believe we've found something even better." Crowley. Jasper's blood turned to ice. Magnus's brother. The family resemblance was unmistakable once he knew what to look for. Same angular features, same dark hair, same eyes that could hold kindness or cruelty, depending on the man behind them. "You wouldn't happen to know a man named Jasper Wolf, would you?" Colt continued, his horse dancing nervously beneath him. "Killed my brother Magnus a few years back. Been tracking him ever since." Amanda's face went white as fresh snow. I don't know anyone by that name." "Now that's curious," Colt said, dismounting with fluid grace. "Because word in town is that Jasper Wolf's been living alone in a cabin about 5 miles back that way. Word is also that some folks saw smoke from a chimney been burning more than usual lately. Almost like he's got company." One of his companions, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, pointed at the tracks in the snow. "Boss, looks like these tracks come from that direction." Colt studied the trail, then looked back at Amanda with new interest. "Ma'am, I think you and I need to have a longer conversation. Boys, help the lady and her children get comfortable. We're going to wait right here until someone comes looking for them." "No," Amanda said, backing away with Penny pressed against her side. "We're not going anywhere with you." "I'm afraid that's not a request," Colt said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He pulled a coiled rope from his saddle, the kind with a noose already tied. "See, this rope has been waiting 3 years to do its job. I made it special for Jasper Wolf's neck. But if he won't come to me, well, maybe I can convince him to change his mind." The implication was clear and terrible. They would use Amanda and her children as bait to draw Jasper into the open. And once they had him, the noose would finish what Magnus's death had started. From his hiding place, Jasper felt his world narrow to a single, sharp point of clarity. He could retreat to his cabin, could pack his things and disappear into the wilderness, could leave the Crowley family to whatever fate Colt and his men decided. It would be the smart thing to do, the survival choice that had kept him alive on a dozen cattle drives and frontier towns. But looking at Penny's terrified face, at Amanda's desperate attempt to shield her children from danger, at baby Samuel crying in his mother's arms, Jasper knew he couldn't walk away. Not from them, not anymore. He thought of Magnus's unfinished letter to Amanda, the promises of a better man that death had cut short. Magnus had been trying to change, trying to overcome the demons the war had left in his mind. He died before he could complete that transformation. But maybe, just maybe, his killer could finish what he'd started. Jasper pulled the small derringer from his coat pocket, Magnus's own gun, taken from his body after that terrible day in Deadwood. He'd kept it as a reminder of his guilt, but now it felt like something else. A tool of justice, maybe, or redemption. The irony wasn't lost on him. Magnus Crowley's gun might be the key to saving Magnus Crowley's family. He began working his way closer, using the trees and underbrush for cover. Scout followed, his paws silent in the snow, his instincts telling him that battle was coming. Colt had made himself comfortable, settling down with his back against a tree while his men kept watch. The noose lay coiled beside him like a sleeping snake, ready to spring into its deadly purpose. "Tell me about Jasper Wolf," Colt said conversationally, pulling out a flask and taking a long drink. "What kind of man is he? Does he care enough about strangers to risk his neck for them?" Amanda said nothing, but Penny spoke up with the innocent courage of childhood. "Mr. Jasper is good. He saved us from the storm and took care of Mama when she was sick, did he now?" Colt's eyes sharpened with interest. "And how did he come to find you folks?" "I walked to his cabin," Penny said proudly. "Through the whole blizzard, all by myself, to get help for Mama and Samuel." Colt's smile was cold as winter wind. "Well, ain't that something? The man who killed your granddaddy ended up playing hero to his family. Life sure is full of surprises." Penny looked confused. "Granddaddy's in heaven with Papa. Mama said so." "That's right, little one. Your papa was my brother Magnus, and the man who's been taking care of you. He's the one who put your papa in the ground." The words hit Penny like a physical blow. Her small face crumpled with confusion and betrayal, and she looked to her mother for denial that didn't come. "That's enough," Amanda said fiercely, pulling Penny closer. "She's just a child. Leave her out of this." "Oh, but children are exactly what this is about," Colt replied. "Magnus's children, growing up without their papa because Jasper Wolf was faster with a gun. Seems only fitting that Wolf should watch them suffer a little before he joins my brother in whatever comes after." Jasper had heard enough. He stepped out of the tree line, his hands visible but ready, the derringer tucked into his belt where it could be reached quickly. "Let them go." "Colt!" he called out, his voice carrying across the snow with quiet authority. "This is between you and me." Colt's men went for their guns, but their leader held up a hand to stop them. "Well, well, the man of the hour. Come to turn yourself in, have you?" "I've come to make a trade," Jasper said, walking closer with deliberate calm. "My life for theirs. That's what you want, isn't it? Justice for Magnus?" "Justice," Colt repeated, rising to his feet with the noose in his hands. "That's a fancy word for hanging, but I suppose it'll do." The confrontation Jasper had been dreading for 3 years was finally here, and the stakes couldn't be higher. In the end, it would all come down to choices, his, Colt's, and the terrible mathematics of who would live and who would die in the Wyoming snow. The rope swung lazily in Colt Crowley's hands, its coarse fibers dark against the white snow. He'd fashioned the noose with careful attention to detail, 13 knots tied with the precision of a man who'd had 3 years to perfect his craft. This wasn't just revenge. It was ceremony, ritual, the closing of a circle that had been broken in a deadwood saloon. "You know what I find interesting?" Colt said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather rather than Jasper's imminent execution. "Magnus wrote me a letter right before he died. Said he was heading west with his family, going to start fresh in Oregon. Said he'd been sober for 2 whole weeks and was finally ready to be the man Amanda deserved." Each word landed like a blow to Jasper's chest. He kept his hands loose at his sides, ready to move, but his eyes never left Amanda's face. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't read, not forgiveness, but not the pure hatred he'd expected either. Something more complex, more painful. 2 weeks sober, Colt continued, testing the rope's strength with sharp tugs. First time since he came home from the war. And then you came along and put a bullet in his heart over what, some drunken words in a saloon? "He drew first," Jasper said quietly. "There were witnesses." "Oh, I know all about the witnesses." Colt's voice dripped contempt. "I know all about how my baby brother, broken by the war, trying to drown his nightmares in whiskey, got into an argument with a stone-cold sober gunfighter who could have walked away at any time. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Jasper felt the truth of it settle into his bones. He could have walked away, should have walked away. A better man would have seen Magnus's pain and found a way to diffuse the situation without bloodshed. "You're right," Jasper said, and the admission seemed to surprise everyone, including himself. "I could have left, should have left. I've carried that knowledge for 3 years. Penny made a small sound of distress, and Amanda's arms tightened around baby Samuel. The child was too young to understand the adult complexities swirling around her, but she could sense the danger and feel the weight of violence building in the air like storm pressure. "Papa," Penny whispered, and for a moment Jasper wasn't sure if she was calling for Magnus or for him. The confusion in her voice broke his heart. "That's right, little one," Colt said gently, his tone completely different when addressing the child. "Your real papa, Magnus Crowley, who loved you more than life itself. Not this pretender who's been playing family with you. He saved us," Penny said with the stubborn loyalty of childhood. "When Mama was sick and Samuel was crying, Mr. Jasper took care of us." "I'm sure he did," Colt replied. "Guilty conscience makes a man do strange things. But taking care of you for a few days doesn't balance the scales for taking your papa away forever." One of Colt's men, the scarred one who'd been studying the tracks, shifted nervously in his saddle. "Boss, we should get this done." Weather's turning again. Indeed, the wind had picked up, and the clouds overhead promised more snow. If they were going to settle this blood debt, it would have to be soon. Jasper looked at Amanda one last time, memorizing her face, the way she held her children close, the strength that kept her standing, despite everything she'd lost. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "For all of it. For Magnus, for lying to you, for bringing danger to your door." Amanda's lips pressed together, and tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. "I know," she whispered, so quietly only he could hear. Those two words carried more weight than forgiveness, more power than absolution. She understood, not just his guilt, but his love for her and the children, his desperate attempt to atone for the irreversible. Colt hefted the rope again, testing its weight. "Enough talking. Time to wait." The voice came from an unexpected source, Penny herself, who pulled away from her mother and walked toward Colt with the fearless determination only children possessed. "Wait, honey," she said, looking up at the big man with Magnus's eyes. "Are you really my uncle?" Colt blinked, clearly not expecting this development. "Yes, little one. I'm your papa's big brother. Then you loved Papa too. More than anything in this world." Penny nodded solemnly, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small and bright. Her drawing, the one showing Jasper as part of their family, the crude but loving portrait she'd made with charcoal and hope. "Papa used to tell me stories," she said, holding up the drawing, "about knights and dragons and people who made mistakes but learned to be better. Mama says Papa was trying to be better when he died." Colt's jaw tightened. "That's right. But if Papa was trying to be better, wouldn't he want other people to be better too? Wouldn't he want Mr. Jasper to help people instead of hurt them?" The question hung in the cold air like a prayer. Scout chose that moment to pad out of the trees, taking his place beside Jasper with quiet loyalty, ready to stand with his master whatever came. Colt stared at the drawing in Penny's small hands, and for just a moment his grip on the rope seemed to loosen. The child's drawing trembled in the wind, its simple figures barely visible against the white landscape. But in that moment, it carried more power than all the guns and ropes and threats that surrounded them. Penny held it out toward her uncle with the absolute trust that only children could muster. "Look," she said, pointing to the figure she'd drawn as Jasper. "I made him part of our family because he loves us. And Mama loves him too, even though she's mad at him right now." Amanda's sharp intake of breath was audible across the clearing. "Penny, it's true, Mama," Penny continued with the devastating honesty of childhood. "I see how you look at him when you think nobody's watching. The same way you used to look at Papa before he went to heaven." Colt's face was a mask of conflicted emotions as he stared at the drawing. In it, his brother's family stood together, whole and happy, with the man who'd killed Magnus somehow transformed into protector and father figure. "You think this changes anything?" Colt asked, but his voice lacked the cold certainty it had carried before. "A child's drawing doesn't bring my brother back." "No," Amanda said quietly, stepping forward to stand beside her daughter. "But maybe it shows us something Magnus would have wanted us to see." She reached into her coat and pulled out the unfinished letter, the one Magnus had been writing the morning he died. Her hands shook as she unfolded it, but her voice was steady as she read. I know I've disappointed you, failed you and the children more times than I can count. But I swear on my father's grave that I'll be the man you married again. The man you deserve. The man our children need. She looked up at Colt, tears streaming down her face. Those were his last words to me, written in his own hand. I know what he wrote, Colt said roughly. Doesn't change the fact that this man killed him. No, it doesn't, Amanda agreed. But it tells us what kind of man Magnus was trying to be. And I think he would have wanted his children to see redemption instead of revenge. One of Colt's men shifted impatiently. Boss, we came here to do a job. All this talking ain't bringing your brother back. But Colt held up a hand for silence, his eyes never leaving the drawing in Penny's hands. What happened that day? He asked Jasper suddenly. In the saloon. Tell me exactly what happened. Jasper closed his eyes, calling up the memory he'd tried so hard to bury. Magnus was drunk, talking loud about the war, about Yankees and carpetbaggers. I tried to calm him down, told him the war was over. He took offense, called me names. I tried to walk away, but you didn't walk away. No. The admission was like pulling a knife from his own chest. He went for his gun. I was faster. It was over in seconds. Why didn't you walk away? Colt pressed. Jasper was quiet for a long moment, searching for truth in the wreckage of memory. Pride, he said finally. Foolish, deadly pride. He'd called me a coward, and I couldn't let that stand. So I stayed, and a good man died because I was too proud to be called names by a drunk. The honesty of the admission seemed to hit Colt like a physical blow. This wasn't the cold-blooded killer he'd been hunting for 3 years. This was a man tormented by his own choices, living in exile as punishment for his pride. Baby Samuel chose that moment to let out a lusty cry, his small voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Amanda shifted him in her arms, trying to comfort him. But the baby was cold and hungry and had been traveling too long. Scout, who had been watching the proceedings with unusual stillness, suddenly bounded toward the group. But instead of going to Jasper, he went straight to Penny, pressing against her legs and whimpering softly. He knows, Penny said, scratching behind the dog's ears. Scout knows we're all supposed to be together. Animals can tell when people belong to each other. Colt looked from the child to the dog, to the drawing, then to his brother's widow holding Magnus's son. His grip on the noose loosened further. Magnus loved animals, he said softly, almost to himself. Had a dog when we were boys, followed him everywhere. He used to say animals were better judges of character than most people. Mr. Jasper's dog saved my life, Penny said simply. He found me in the snow when I was almost frozen. If Scout is good, and Scout loves Mr. Jasper, then Mr. Jasper must be good too. The logic was childish in its simplicity, but it carried a weight that all the adult arguments had lacked. Even Colt's men seemed affected by it, their hands moving away from their gun butts. 3 years, Colt said, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years I've been hunting you, planning what I'd do when I found you. And now, he looked at the rope in his hands, as if seeing it for the first time, then at his brother's family standing in the snow. Amanda had moved closer to Jasper, not quite touching, but no longer maintaining the distance of anger. Penny held her drawing like a shield against hatred. Baby Samuel had quieted in his mother's arms, lulled by the familiar voices around him. Now I find Magnus's children calling you family, Colt finished. He let the noose fall to the snow, its coils dark against the white. What kind of man would I be if I destroyed the only father figure they've known since Magnus died? 6 months later, the photographer in Laramie captured them perfectly. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, by forgiveness, by the kind of love that grows stronger in broken places. Jasper stood with his hand on Amanda's shoulder, wearing the silver star of a deputy sheriff, a job that let him use his skills to protect rather than destroy. Amanda sat beside him in her best dress, the same deep blue as her wedding gown, but tailored for a different kind of beginning. On her lap, baby Samuel reached toward the camera with chubby fingers, no longer the frail infant who'd nearly died. In the storm, but a healthy, laughing child who called Jasper Papa with complete naturalness. And Penny, dear wise Penny, stood between them wearing a smile that could have lit up the whole Wyoming territory. She'd grown taller in the months since that terrible day in the snow, but she still carried her father's locket and still drew pictures of their family with the careful attention of someone who understood how precious such things were. Scout lay at their feet, graying a bit around the muzzle, but still alert, still protective of the pack he'd helped save. The photographer had wanted to move the dog out of the frame, but Amanda had insisted he stay. "He's family too," she'd said. And that was the end of the discussion. The photograph would sit on their mantelpiece for decades to come, a testament to the strange alchemy that could transform grief into joy, guilt into grace, strangers into family. They'd moved to Laramie after the wedding, a quiet ceremony in the little church where Amanda and Magnus had exchanged their first vows. Some might have called it scandalous, a widow marrying her husband's killer, but the people who mattered understood. Love, real love, didn't follow the rules society tried to impose on it. Sheriff Barrett had been glad to have Jasper as a deputy. Word of his actions during the storm had spread through the territory. How he'd risked his life to save a family, how he'd faced down armed men to protect them, how he'd turned away from violence even when it might have been easier to fight. "Man's got a steady hand and a good heart," Barrett had told the town council. "That's what we need in law enforcement, someone who understands the weight of life and death decisions." Jasper's first case had involved tracking down a gang of rustlers who'd been terrorizing the smaller ranches. He'd brought them in alive, talking them into surrender instead of forcing a gunfight. The old Jasper might have been quicker to draw, might have solved the problem with bullets instead of words. But fatherhood had changed him in ways he was still discovering. Papa Jasper, Penny had taken to calling him, the title as natural as breathing. She'd never forgotten Magnus. His locket still hung around her neck, and she still told baby Samuel stories about their angel papa who watched over them from heaven. But she'd made room in her heart for two fathers, the one who'd given her life and the one who'd saved it. Amanda had found work as a seamstress, her skilled hands much in demand among the ladies of Laramie. She worked from their small house on the edge of town, taking in alterations and creating wedding dresses for other women starting new lives. Sometimes late at night, she would tell Jasper about Magnus, not with sadness now, but with the gentle affection of someone grateful for what was, while accepting what could never be again. "He would have liked you," she'd said one evening as they watched the children play in their small garden. "Once he got past his pride and his pain, he would have seen what I see." "What's that?" Jasper had asked. "A good man trying to be better. That's all any of us can do." They'd visited Magnus's grave on their first wedding anniversary, all four of them together. Penny had left wildflowers on the headstone, and Amanda had whispered words Jasper couldn't hear. He'd stood back, feeling like an intruder on their private grief, until Amanda had taken his hand and drawn him forward. "Magnus," she'd said too, "the stone," her voice clear and strong. "I want you to meet the man who's been taking care of us. I know it's complicated, I know it's strange, but I need you to know that your children are loved and safe and happy. I hope that brings you peace." Jasper had expected to feel shame standing at Magnus Crowley's grave, but instead he'd felt something unexpected. Acceptance. Not forgiveness, that was still a work in progress, but a sense that the circle was finally complete, that Magnus's love for his family had somehow survived death and transformed the man who'd ended his life. Now, looking at their family photograph, Jasper marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. A blizzard's chance encounter had become something none of them could have imagined. A second chance at happiness, a redemption earned through love rather than penance. Baby Samuel took his first steps a week after the photograph was taken, todding from Amanda's arms straight to Jasper with the absolute trust of a child who'd never known fear in his father's presence. Watching him, Jasper understood that some gifts came not through deserving but through grace, the grace to be forgiven by those you'd wronged, the grace to forgive yourself, the grace to believe that broken things could be made whole again. Outside their house, Wyoming stretched endlessly in all directions, harsh and beautiful and full of possibilities. There would be other storms, other challenges, other moments when the past would rise up to test their hard-won peace. But they would face them together. This family built on the foundation of second chances and the radical notion that love could triumph even over the deepest wounds. In the growing dusk, as Amanda tucked the children into bed and Jasper banked the fire for the night, Scout settled himself across the threshold. Still on guard, still protective, still the faithful sentinel who'd help save them all. And if Magnus Crowley's spirit lingered in the Wyoming wind, perhaps it whispered not of vengeance or regret, but of gratitude that his children had found their way home at last.